Welcome. I hope you're ready to witness some events and oddities you've never heard of in this crazy world of aristocrats and wizards. If you're not, stop the video and do a handstand. Ready? Let's begin. Our story begins at Tristan Magic Academy in the amphitheater classroom, where teacher Chevreuse teaches about the earth element of magic and demonstrates a simple earth spell. Later he asks Louise to perform the spell, but all the students are surprised by this. One student speaks up, saying it's not a good idea and that Louise is dangerous, but the teacher doesn't listen and calls on Louise to cast the spell. Meanwhile, the headmaster explains that there have been no complaints during this term and things are going well, and the assistant principal Longville agrees. The headmaster also remembers that the servant summoning ceremony is tomorrow, where servants are summoned to serve the wizards who own them. Suddenly, there's an explosion and the headmaster is shocked to learn that it was caused by Louise, who admits to making a small mistake that resulted in the entire amphitheater exploding. Leaving the disciplinary committee meeting, Kirch, another student, asks Louise what happened, but Louise says that the professor is responsible for the incident. When Kirky teases her for not being able to perform magic with her, Louise leaves confidently, saying that she's fully capable of summoning a servant at the ceremony the next day. The next day, the servant summoning ceremony begins, and the students summon their servants one by one. Some summon a flying eye, others a salamander, and one even summons a handsome underground monster. When the teacher asks if everyone has finished summoning, he notices Louise hiding in the back, and it's her turn to summon her servant. Louise begins the spell with strange words and completes it. But as usual, there's an explosion, causing everyone to fall to the ground. When they look up, they see that the creature that has appeared is a human, which surprises everyone, including Louise, who asks the human who he is, but he doesn't understand her because they speak different languages. Everyone teases Louise for summoning a peasant as her servant, and when she tries to summon another servant, the teacher tells her that this is a sacred ceremony, and she cannot do so. The human tries to run away, but Louise catches him and continues to complain. The teacher tells her that she must complete the ceremony, and reluctantly, Louise agrees. She whispers some special words and kisses our hero, Sado, completing the contract. Sado's body is filled with warmth, and a servant Mark appears, and he faints. When he wakes up, he thinks it was all a dream, but Louise is waiting for him. He screams and says he wants to go home, but Louise takes off her clothes and throws them on him, telling him to wash them. As Sado complains, Louise casts a silent spell on him, and there is another explosion. When Sado regains consciousness, he realizes that he can understand Louise. This strange spell enables the communication between them. Louise tells him that he is her servant and Sado is shocked. Meanwhile, the teacher who is present at the ceremony investigates Sado's servant seal and is surprised to see that something strange is going on. Louise introduces herself to him and they start chatting. While Louise complains, she realizes that Sado has fled. As Sado runs down, he sees a girl named Kate and a boy named Geach flirting. Hiraga tries to sneak by while Geach notices him, and as they talk about him, Sado runs away and Louise runs after him. Just as Sado is about to escape, he starts to float in the air. Geach did this, and as he hovers in the air, Sado sees two moons in the sky and screams in disbelief. In the past, we see Sado in Tokyo walking down the street when he sees a green portal and puts his hand into it, and the portal sucks him in. Inside the portal, he hears Louise's voice. At night, Sado tries to explain to Louise that he is not from this world while he is chained up, but Louise does not believe him and throws her clothes on top of him to wash. After a little argument, Louise lies down and goes to sleep. Sado protests and yells at her, but Louise tells him that she won't feed him if he doesn't comply. Sado helplessly lies down on the ground. When morning comes, Sado tells her that he washed her clothes and throws them on top of her, but because he forgot a piece of clothing, she tells him that she won't give him breakfast. Sado asks her to unchain him, but Louise tells him to put on his clothes, otherwise she won't fulfill his requests. Sado does what he is told and Louise releases him, and they go to have breakfast together. When they arrive at the breakfast table, Louise tells him that he can't sit there and that he is a peasant, pointing to a plate on the ground. While everyone eats, Sado takes a piece of bread from the plate on the ground that is as hard as a car tire and eats it. Then they go down to the garden where the servants and wizards are, and they meet Kirch and her salamander. After Kirky teases Louise a bit, she leaves. Louise gets angry and asks Sado for tea. While Sado walks through the garden, he sees a flying one-eyed servant and gets scared and backs away, bumping into a girl named Siesta, who works as a maid here. They introduce themselves and chat. and in the meantime they hear a voice from behind, which is Gucci's voice. Seeing this, Sado burns with a desire for revenge, so he takes the cake from Siesta and walks towards the table. Meanwhile, Gucci is talking to his girlfriend and she tells him that she heard he was getting close to another girl. As Sado hands over the cake and walks away, he sarcastically snitches on Gucci, confirming what she heard. At that moment, Gucci's flirt, Kate, was looking for him, and when Gucci saw her, he ran away. Sado snitched on him to Kate. Kate ran over, and after a little chat, everything was understood. The girls slapped Gucci and walked away. Everyone laughed at Gucci while he angrily looked at Sado, stood up, and challenged him to a duel. Louise ran over and insisted that Sado not do it, but he didn't listen and went to the place where the duel would take place. Meanwhile, the ceremonial teacher went to the headmaster and told her that the seal that Sado had was strange and there was a problem with it. Sado stood ready for the duel against Gucci, while Louise asked him not to do it, but Gucci sarcastically refused. When the duel started, Gucci summoned a large bronze Valkyrie golem. The golem beat up Sado, but he kept getting up. When things got heated and Sado stood up with wounds on his face, Gucci gave him a sword for a fairer fight. When Sado took the sword, he suddenly felt a different energy, sliced the golem in half, and Gucci summoned many more golems. After defeating them all, Sado pointed his sword at Gucci, and Gucci surrendered. Everyone watched in shock as Sado dropped the sword and collapsed. Louise took him to her bed to rest, and when Sado woke up, Siesta entered the room with food and told him he had been asleep for 3 days. Sado learned that Louise had been watching over him while he was unconscious. The following day, Hiraga is doing laundry in the garden and complaining about the situation. We learned that the laundry piled up while he was sleeping, and Hiraga thanks Louise for taking care of him while he was unconscious. Of course, they immediately start arguing afterward. Hiraga tells himself that he is as equal to the other familiars in the garden and wonders when he'll be able to return home. Later, we see a class in the amphitheater where the teacher is asking questions and the students are answering. Meanwhile, Hiraga is checking out the other female students. When Louise is teased in class and called Zero, Hiraga realizes why and starts teasing her too. Louise gets very angry and punishes Hiraga by not letting him eat. Hiraga goes crazy from hunger at night and tries to convince Louise to let him eat. But he accidentally says something he shouldn't have, and Louise punishes him even more by throwing him out. Siesta sees him and takes him to the kitchen to feed him some delicious food. Hiraga meets Chef Marteau there, and after a brief conversation, Chef Marteau tries to kiss him, but Hiraga rejects him. Later, Hiraga and Siesta go outside and chat. She tells him how difficult her life is and how hard it is to recover from it. After a little more chatting, Siesta says she wants to continue the conversation and Hiraga agrees. Hiraga takes Kirchi's salamander by the scruff of its neck and leads Hiraga to Kirchi's room. Hiraga is shocked as Kirk introduces herself in the most provocative way possible, confessing her love for him. As Kirky approaches him, her boyfriend flies in through the window, angry that she didn't come to their meeting and demanding to know who Hiraga is. Kirky blasts him with a fire spell, and when several more male guests arrive to confront her, she sends them all packing with her flames. She then lays Hiraga down on the floor and professes her love for him. Hiraga tries to come up with excuses, but Kirky kisses him just as Louise enters the room, demanding to know what's going on. Realizing the situation, Louise angrily takes Hiraga away from Kirch. When they enter the room, Louise becomes furious with Hiraga, taking a horsewhip and striking the ground with it. As she approaches him with the whip, Hiraga grabs her hand and asks if her behavior is due to jealousy. Louise kicks him and explains that it's not right as their families conflict. They continue to talk, and Louise reveals that Hiraga is not a swordsmanship expert, but gained the ability to wield a sword as a servant. The next morning, Kircha contemplates how to seduce Hiraga while applying makeup. She then sees Louise and Hiraga riding horses outside and goes crazy, running to Tabitha's room and demanding her help. Tabitha initially refuses, but Kirky persists, saying she can't do it without her servant, so Tabitha agrees to help, and they fly off to follow them. Meanwhile, Louise and Hiraga go to a weapon shop in town and look at swords. Unable to afford anything, Louise settles for an old rusty sword. On the way back, Hiraga remembers that the reason she couldn't afford anything was that she had bought expensive medicine, but he doesn't say anything. Kircha witnesses this and buys the expensive sword for Hiraga. This causes a fight between Kirch and Louise, which Tabitha breaks up. They go to Hiraga and ask him which sword he wants. and before he can make a choice, the sword begins to speak, shocking everyone. They realize it is a talking sword named Delfringer. In the morning, the principal writes a letter and gives it to someone named Count Mott. Meanwhile, the secretary enters and overhears the manager discussing inappropriate topics, and once the conversation is over, the manager gets beaten up for doing something perverted. In the academy garden, Hiraga Sado is washing clothes at a fountain when Siesta greets him and offers to help him with the laundry. Sado thanks her, and when Siesta asks where he is from, he says Earth. Siesta says goodnight and goes to her room, while Hiraga meets Kirchi on his way to his room. Kirchi seduces him with the sword she gave him as a gift, telling him it's a symbol of her love. When Sado asks why she chose him instead of other aristocrats, Kirchi's answer does not satisfy him. As Sado tries to leave, Kirchi offers him various gifts to try to manipulate him. But when Sado persists in leaving, Kirchi jumps on him. At this moment, Louise enters and angrily drags Sado into her room, punishing him with her whip. The next morning, Hiraga meets the chef, who invites him to lunch. While eating, Sado asks about Siesta, and the chef tells him that she has quit her job. Sado is shocked and wonders why Siesta didn't tell him. When he asks Louise about it, the talking sword reveals that Siesta will become Count Mott's mistress. Later, Louise and Kurt argue in the cafeteria, but when they learn that Sado asked for the address of Mott's mansion, they quickly set off to find him. Meanwhile, Sado arrives at the doorstep of the mansion and is caught by a guard. While inside, Count Mott speaks too closely to Siesta when the doorbell rings and Sado enters. Upon hearing Sado's requests, Kant becomes angry and refuses. When Kant becomes enraged after hearing Sado's words, he takes a wand and Siesta enters to stop him. Kant demands a book from Germany and promises to return Siesta if it is delivered. Realizing that the book is Kirch's book, Sado runs back to the academy while Louise takes him back on horseback. Sado pretends to be asleep and goes to Kirch's room to ask for the book. Kirchi tells Sado that the book is her dowry and she will give it to him if he becomes her lover. Sado becomes angry and rides a horse away while Tabitha watches from the window. Kirchi goes to Louise's room and wakes her up, telling her that Sado has escaped. Sado was caught trying to sneak back into the mansion, and after a pleasant conversation with Count Mott, he draws his sword on him. Meanwhile, Tabitha, Kirk, and Louise approach the mansion. Sado realizes that he cannot use his special power while holding the sword, and is stuck to the ground with water magic by Kant just as an ice spike is about to hit his head. Louise intervenes just in time. They apologize to Count Mott, and Kirch gives him the book. Kant immediately softens and returns Siesta to Sado. I won't reveal the content of the book. When they return to the academy, Siesta kisses Sado as a small gift. When Sado goes to Louise, she becomes angry with him again, and after a heated argument, this chapter comes to an end. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this summary. Goodbye, friends.